Welcome, i5 Corridor fans, subscribers, and hopefully new fans and subscribers as well to the very first episode of the i5 Corridor Rip City Pod. I'm your host, Eric Anderson. I'm an NBA writer for Heavy.com. I've been in the journalism game for about a half decade before doing some things in the communications world, but Tyson has graciously allowed me to jump back into sports media and help level up the I-5 corridor into more expansive coverage, specifically of the Blazers and the NBA at large. So, without bemoaning this too much, we're launching this podcast and we're going to take a look at 10 things to know about your 2025-26 Portland Trailblazers. These are going to be things like the team's identity, the rotation, pressure points that could largely decide how the Blazers look in 25-26. And we'll have full notes and more expansive coverage continuing on Tyson's I-5 corridor. So before we look at what to expect this season, let's quickly take a look back at what happened in 2024. The Blazers finished with a 36 and 46 overall record. That was largely expected. The team overall scored about 110 points per game, which was good for 22nd in the league. The defense gave up about 113 points per game, which was 15th in the league. So the defense was a little bit stronger than the offense, at least in the aggregate. And then for a net rating, the team finished with a -3, which was 22nd in the league. So lots of below average numbers there, except defense, which finished, slightly better, or actually right at average, 15th. So a few bright spots from the past season were Tumani Kamara finishing as an All NBA defensive second teamer, largely seen as a huge steal in the Phoenix Suns trade. Tumani's been an incredible player and someone that's super fun to watch. And all we're hearing from media days and leading up into the season is Tumani knows he can play defense and he's ready to show his offense. So it's a pretty exciting player. He's young, he's ready. He's ready to give more to the team. And if his role expands to that, it'll be really exciting to see what he can do. And then in addition to that, Donovan Clingan also was named to the all-rookie second team. So kind of a feather in the cap for general manager Joe Cronin and his draft class. Both those players, although Kumara wasn't drafted by the Blazers, he did swing the trade that brought Kumara in and then obviously drafted Clingan. So those two players are, they have the arrow pointing up. They're ready to play and they're going to be exciting to see. So going into the 25-26 season, we're really hearing a lot of narratives around the team about how this defense is the backbone and how this defense was so strong a season ago, or at least late in the season. So before we dive in too deeply into what the Blazers are and what they could be, I wanted to do a quick look back on if those claims really had much merit. We heard about it quite a bit in March and April last year, and it's kind of been repeated, quite a bit. But from the All-Star break on, Portland posted a 2-10 record versus would-be 24-25 playoff teams. And their overall record a season ago against playoff teams was 14-30, which is a 31.8% win rate. They went 22-16 versus non-playoff teams. So what this tells you is Portland was good at beating teams that were in its kind of same competitive level and really struggled against teams that were making playoff pushes. So when we hear narratives about is the defense going to be elite and was it elite last season ago, it was elite for a small bit against non-playoff teams. We didn't really see much success against playoff teams, which for a young team and a rebuilding team and a team that was kind of shuffling some pieces in and out and trying to figure out what the future could be, that's relatively to be expected. So we're still hearing more about this defense that's, clicked. It's a major foundation of what the group wants to achieve. Um, and that's absolutely what you want to hear out of a coaching staff going into a season. A young team theoretically that has fresher legs than everybody else, and that can play at a high level or play at a more athletic level, I should say. You want your team to buy into that defense first. So it makes sense that we're hearing these things come out of media day and the first few practices leading into the preseason. Um, but like we said before, we didn't really see the major signs of an elite defense last season, except against a few bad teams. So just to further drive that point home, in March, the Blazers were a 5-10 team, and they surrendered about 115 points per game, which was it was actually the second worst stretch of the season for the Blazers. And then in April, which obviously is a limited sample size with 7 games, the Blazers posted 108 points given up per game, which was its second best mark. It was a very good, and it led to a winning record. But in those games, they're playing the likes of the Atlanta Hawks, Toronto Raptors, Bulls, Spurs, Jazz, Warriors, which was a 17-point loss, and the final game of the season against the Lakers, where both teams basically put in their third string at best lineup. So there wasn't really a single game in the last stretch of the season where you said, oh, our defense, where Portland would say, our defense is this, look at this game. Instead, we're hearing this general mindset that like the defense was so good and we're going to build on that. Certainly, the defense is able to be built upon, but there's not this huge swath of evidence that suggests that the Blazers defense is going to be top 10 and is guaranteed to be a top 10. They might be top 10 against non-playoff teams. I will absolutely buy that right now, but it's where you want to see the defense click and where you want to see huge growth is playing against those very competitive teams in high stakes games and executing at an elite level. And that might be asking a lot, but that's part of the tale that's being told so far this season is we're a defensive first team and we're gonna be elite. So in this podcast, we want to really dive into what we're hearing, what we heard from media day, what you can look for in the Blazers this season, and things you can actually tangibly grab onto and actually check and keep track of for viewers at home. And when you're watching the Blazers, just things you can actually pinpoint and dial into. So this season, Vegas, at least via BetMGM, is thinking the Blazers are going to be largely the same team they were a season ago. The win total currently by BetMGM is at 35.5, which is basically the same, and that's despite some new faces in Portland and a few exits. But what we heard from media day is what we should be looking at is the identity. The staff is saying defense is the core. Late season numbers look to the part. As we mentioned, that's partially true, but does not have a big enough sample size for us to like fully hang our hats on. The offense is something that's kind of popping up a little bit in discussions in preseason discussions. We're hearing about a shift to a faster, motion-heavy principle, less predictable, static pick and roll, more cutting, more early flow. What this tells me is, hey, Damian Lillard's not healthy this season. He's not playing this season, so we're not going to run a billion pick and rolls. And we saw better efficient offense when Scoot Henderson wasn't a high usage point guard last season and came off the bench. So what that tells me is the team wants to be more balanced, wants to create a cohesive offensive system where Scoot doesn't have to make a billion decisions every possession and try to be hyper efficient while trying to figure out his own offense. And you have some new pieces too. You have like players like Drew Holiday coming in that while he can run an offense, he's mostly known for being a role player on offense and an elite defensive player, which goes to the next point. We've heard a lot about how Drew Holiday is going to be a tone setter. He's going to be a player that is a big voice in the locker room, a defensive presence, a veteran, a huge mentor for Scoot, and just a guy that you can really build a culture around. You know, a guy that you can rely upon as a good teammate and as someone that cares and will do things the right way. We've heard a lot about Jeremy Grant, and we've heard kind of the little bumps from interviews and the corrections the next day in an interview saying, you know, he's going to respect his role, whatever it is. He expects to compete for a starting role, and we've heard that he can be a half court pressure valve for an offense. And there's good and there's bad that comes with that. There's creation in a late shot clock situation, but then there's also um, isolation mid-range jumpers that can drive people crazy. You know, it is largely seen as the most inefficient shot in basketball, and sometimes you see Jeremy shoot a tremendous amount of those. So will he be able to find that really strong role in offense while providing a switchable defender on the other side of the ball? And then there's the exciting stuff from young players. Excuse me, like Hansen Young. His development track will be fascinating. Will he start right away? No. Will he be one of the first few guys off the bench? Maybe. Maybe in some games. And he could end up in the G League too. Like nothing's really off the table for Hansen, but he's shown in some spurts in preseason that he's productive, that he doesn't stop the ball in a bad way. He's a connective piece. That's where you hear the Nikola Jokic comparisons come from, because he can really run an offense as a point center. Now the Blazers won't ask him to do that, but you might see little snippets of it. And then there's always the Robert Williams question. How much is he going to be able to give? We've seen when he's a Boston Celtic and on a playoff team, he can be very productive and almost be a cornerstone of a defense. So what's Robert Williams going to give the Blazers this season? And then speaking of availability, Scoot obviously suffered a hamstring injury a week ago, and his ramp up will be pretty interesting to watch, because this is a pivotal season for Scoot. Scoot's now under the tutelage of an all defensive guard in Drew Holiday, and a two-time NBA champion in Drew Holiday as well. So how will Scoot take those little snippets and those little lessons and craft his own game around that? You know, I think at this point, a lot of people in Portland would be excited to see Scoot become a Drew Holiday-ish player. I think that would be fantastic. I think people would be very excited about that. But then people still kind of also dream of him being a Russell Westbrook type, like with elite athleticism and an ability to do so many things. That's still not out of the question for Scoot. But he has to be on the court first before we see any of that. And so if we don't get a good picture of Scoot early, it'll be hard to know. So we won't see him probably for the first month of the season, and it might be a little bit longer than that, but that'll be something worth looking at. And then the overall team picture is, from at least what we're hearing early from, you know, executives and Coach Billups, is the team should compete nightly and growth should be the North Star for success. So what that tells you kind of is there'll be some games that the Blazers should be winning and could be winning, but a loss isn't going to be the end of the world in those games, as long as players are continuing to grow. So with that backdrop, here are 10 things that actually matter on a week-to-week basis, each with a little stat that if you at home were so interested in checking out, you could figure out, is this just talk, or are the Blazers actually implementing this change and this growth? And then we'll try to break it down a little bit farther after that. So with that said, our first thing to watch is defense first as an identity is non-negotiable. We've heard a lot about this. We've heard Coach Billups. And it's been recent weeks, but really last season we saw some benchings of players who didn't play defense up to the level that was expected. We saw um, we heard it preached, and we saw how the team performed when the defense was at least better than average. It made the team competitive. Um, so why this matters as a thing to watch is the ceiling with this team is going to start with stops and finishing possessions. So that's not just the first contest, the first um, missed force of a missed shot. It's the rebound that comes with it. And so a huge area of growth for the Blazers to be this good defensive team will be the defensive rebounding percentage. And this is something that you can track easily. A season ago, the Blazers were the 28th team in defensive rebound percentage, which was 72.5% of defensive rebounds they captured. And not so, also attached to that is the opposing second chance points. Coach Billups did put the nice bow on that. So we'll see if that's something that carries on throughout the rest of the season. So our media day quote from Coach Billups is, "I believe in if we're going to be any good, we need to be a defensive first team. We finally established that." Finally establishing that is a bit of a stretch, but that's what I expect coaches to say and to preach and to put out there in the ether that they're an established defensive team. Because if you can't mentally start connecting to that as a player and as an organization, you'll never accomplish it. Obviously, for that to be true, we'll need to see results that are the Blazers holding a playoff team to 100 points, to sub 110 points, to somewhere in the 90s. That would be an incredible result. So we like hearing Coach Billups say that we need to see a little bit more of a sample size before that is truth. So one of the biggest things with that defensive first mindset will be, can Portland finish possessions? Identity is only real if you can clean the glass. And last season, as previously mentioned, the Blazers were not very good at cleaning up the glass. So second chance points weren't the worst in the league, but they were below league average. And I would argue that a clean glass, a win on the glass is going to lead to wins in the win column. So we'll see what the Blazers do in 2025-26. Obviously, the team got bigger. More centers is more fun, is more rebound opportunities. Obviously, the Blazers aren't going to trot out a massive lineup every night, but they have opportunities to play two bigs. They have opportunities to play big in general. It'll be interesting to see how they rebound if they choose to go small. There could be some lineups where you see Jeremy Grant at the 4 or the 5, where rebounding becomes even more paramount to smaller lineups. So if the Blazers can't finish those defensive possessions, which is going to be the backbone of this team, then we're going to see some struggles. Thing number 2 to watch. A faster, motion-heavy offense replaces predictability. And where we're using the word predictability is because a pick and roll is a very predictable play in basketball, but it's also the most impactful play in basketball, and the one that every team, regardless of what their offensive philosophy is, will run a gazillion times to the ground. So the narrative around this is early actions and cutting should lead to more potential assists and to paint touches and to being a more unpredictable, balanced, dynamic offense, which is great. It sounds great. If you're trying to figure out if this is true or not, and if this is something that's actually working, you'd probably take a look at potential assists, which is a metric that the Blazers ranked pretty low in last season. They were 23rd in the league in potential assists with 44.9 per game. They were actually a pretty good paint touch team. So getting a foot, getting 2 feet into the paint creates a ton of scoring opportunities for the rest of your offense. Uh, you'll see coaches preach all the time that if you can come to a 2 foot stop in the paint, you have playmaking potential that's just not there otherwise. So the Blazers a season ago were 23.9 paint touches per game, which was eighth in the league. They don't really need to improve that too much. That's a fine number. If it goes up, that's even more impressive. But what I'd be interested in seeing is if those potential assists go up, and if the paint touches do end up going up. The most of the NBA right now is a game played on the perimeter first and paint second. Even if the paint touches come after a drive. Um, so we'll see what the Blazers end up doing in that department. And a quote from Media Day that kind of backs this up is when Billups said, "We'll get away from predictable things, not as much standing around or just run the pick and roll, and the other three guys just kind of stand and watch, standing and watching." Um, and so what I think is super interesting about the idea of a motion offense and the idea of not three people standing around and watching is how a motion could really unlock Jeremy Grant, Denny Advia, Tumani Kamara, and your kind of your swingmen, your slashers, your forwards, who are obviously incredible athletes, obviously incredible scorers in the right circumstances, and what it can do. So Jeremy Grant obviously is a pretty talented scorer. If a motion offense allows for more catch and shoot threes for him, more one move, straight line drives, an elbow touch, or even just a scramble on the back of a hectic possession, I think that does unlock a lot of what the Blazers can be good at. I think we saw Denny do this a little bit in international play this past summer, and Tumani, we haven't seen do a ton of it, but as a cutter and as a dunker and just a pure athlete, we know he's capable of it. So if this motion allows for any kind of freelance play or just more creativity that allows guys to do more when the ball is either going to swing the direction or is in their hands, I think that will be a huge part of the Blazers offense and a huge part of what makes them unique this season. Now, obviously, this is all just talk, so we'll see if there's any substance behind it. And there's a preseason game on Wednesday. That's October 8th. And we'll see if we get any looks at that. Obviously, it's preseason, so you don't really have any incentive to share your entire game plan, but we'll see if it starts to manifest that way. Thing number 3 is Drew Holiday is going to be a tone setter for the defense and kind of like the adult in the room, right? He's the proven veteran. He's been doing it for a long time. Drew's in, what is this, a season 19, 20? And he's been all defense. He maybe had a few bad months a season ago, and that leads people to wonder, is the good run over, or was he perhaps playing through an injury, or did the Celtics perhaps change their defense in a way that may limit some of his effectiveness? But, the point of attack defense and late game poise and off ball spacing will be really critical to a lot of success in the league. And we've seen that with other teams. I think what Drew Holiday provides for especially a lot of young players is he's going to do his job really well. You don't have to rely on him for 36 minutes a game and lock down defense and 15 to 20 points a game. Can Drew do that? Absolutely. No doubt in my mind. I don't know if he can do it for 82 games a season, and I don't think you want him to do it for 82 games a season. But he absolutely can give you really quality minutes. And I think the formula for success for the Blazers will be finding the right mix of minutes, finding the right lineups where he can shepherd young talent and impact the game as much as possible. And, hopefully create a winning atmosphere. So if you're looking for one metric to like figure out if the Drew Holiday experiment is working, I think a good one would be the clutch turnover percentage for the Blazers. And you could look at some individual defensive numbers, specifically at the point of attack and the pick and roll. Those are kind of niche numbers and things that not a lot of people are going to be. You won't see those on the broadcast too often. While the Blazers broadcast does an incredible job of looking at advanced stats and specific stats, you might not see that one once all season next year. But if you looked at clutch turnover percentage, the Blazers a season ago were 18th. They typically had one turnover in the clutch situation, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the good teams just don't turn the ball over when the game's on the line. Is what that tells you, and what you should take away there. So another media day quote. This is Coach Billups talking about Drew. Is he's one of the best defenders in his generation. And Drew himself said he wants to bring some consistency. His expectation is to win. He's got a lot left in him. So this isn't like it never was. It never was a retirement ceremony or, a showcase, a free agent showcase situation where he comes and shows out for a few months and the Blazers trade him. Could Drew be traded before the trade deadline to a contender? Sure. Would that be a good move for Drew? Yeah, absolutely. But I can also see the value in really trying to maximize Drew's leadership and developing a young point guard like Scoot. It makes a ton of sense this season that those two are going to overlap. So I think one way to see that this whole thing has gone well, especially with Drew on the Portland Trailblazers, is just looking for those winning plays that aren't going to show up in the box score necessarily. So that could be something like navigating a screen into a stop, getting a deflection, blowing up a screen before it happens, just communicating in those really crafty, neat ways. It can be something as simple as just making the correct pass forward to start a fast break or to accentuate the fast break, not over dribbling. It's a lot of simple stuff, and it's not sexy basketball, but players like Drew and reasons why players like Drew are so special is because they just do those things instinctively. They don't need to be coached to do that. They do those things. And hunting for 2-for-1s. I don't know if Drew necessarily is the king of the 2-for-1, but he'll certainly be a player that tries to raise the alarm on, hey, there's 30-ish seconds left. Let's make sure, or whatever the shot clock situation is, let's make sure we take a quick shot so we can potentially get the ball back again. I think you'll see those things. You'll see those things in little moments. It might not happen every game, but you'll see Drew doing winning things as long as the Blazers actually are trying to win, and they might not always be motivated to win every game. If the season goes south, you might see a little bit more injury reports popping up, and you might see a little bit more interesting, deeper rotations against really good teams that you might not have expected to see. So seeing how Drew is making small winning plays and what they mean to the team overall will be really interesting this season. So thing number 4 is the on-ramp for Scoot Henderson being reinserted into this lineup after his hamstring injury. It'll be really interesting to see how this offense develops. Obviously, it'll be run largely by Drew Holiday, but it'll be really interesting to see when Scoot's healthy and ready to come back into the mix, how that shapes the guard room, how it shapes the guard play, and what kind of live ball turnover risk is there. There'll be an interesting dynamic because Scoot is kind of in a prove it season. Drew doesn't need to prove anything. And there's not a lot of elite ball handling on the roster beyond those two. We've seen Denny do some interesting things. Obviously, if Young gets an extended run, it'll be interesting to see what he has to do, what he can do in tough decision-making situations. But Scoot and Drew could be a lineup that gets thrown out there a little bit, and then Scoot plus, Shaden, or plus Tumani, plus anyone that's trying to expand their offensive game this season will be really interesting to see, because with an expanded offensive game comes more decision making, more pressure, and more defenses catered to what you're trying to do. So Scoot's factoring into that will be really interesting. And if you were trying to take a look at a metric to see how that goes, you could just look at net rating for that lineup and live ball turnovers from that lineup. Eventually we can take a look at how the net rating between Scoot and Holiday play together, and if there's a ton of live ball turnovers when they share the court. It's not perfect as a metric, but you could take a look at it. But a season ago, just in a wide sense, Scoot only averaged 2.7 turnovers per game, which was down from his rookie year, which came on the back of his usage dropping quite a bit. But the amazing part to me is his usage dropped, his turnovers dropped, but his assist rate stayed about the same. So he found a way to be more efficient in a lot of ways, despite having a reduced role and a secondary role, which tells you that there's something to that. He is developing. What I'm sure fans want to see is eye-popping stats, big points, big assists, highlight reel dunks. But there was some real positives to that role he played and the way he played it. So our media day quote comes from Joe Cronin, which, this could take as many as 10 weeks, which would be 2 months of the season. They said they'll be smart and thinking big picture with the recovery. Scoot himself said it's a minor setback. He's going to come back stronger than ever. That's pretty classic, confident rhetoric from a player. But I think when we do finally get to see Scoot, and we get to see him play with Drew, we're gonna really see, is this Scoot with training wheels and the offense is being dumbed down to the point where he can't make mistakes, or is it just turbo mode? Is playing next to a veteran like Drew just unlocking every single top 5 lottery pick potential of what we all thought Scoot could be? We won't know really until we see those two play together. And ideally what you'll see is all the reads as a ball handler and decision maker in the offense simplifying. You'll see a first touch, you'll see a quick first touch, a quick decision, you'll see a paint touch, and you might see a kick out to a wide open 3, or you'll see a finish in the paint. Drew will provide spacing, he will provide decision making, and he will provide just a solid, savvy veteran presence that Scoot really hasn't had in his career, right? He hasn't had a steadfast, savvy yeoman of a teammate yet. So that, I think that could be, all respect to Jeremy Grant. I think having a guard that's been in the trenches and seen the highest level of offensives and defenses in the NBA will be a huge boon to Scoot. So it'll be interesting to see when those two finally do share the court, whether that's in November or December, what that looks like. I think number 5 to look at is Jeremy Grant's fit in a 5-out driving kick offense. If this motion offense thing is legit, and this is going to be how the Blazers run their offense, what's Jeremy Grant going to look like? We've seen he can be an ISO scorer, and we talked a little bit about it at the top, about you don't always want to see Jeremy Grant in ISO situations in the mid-range. He can always get a look, and he can always create, but the efficiency of those shots is where you go. Is that a good thing, or is it just the thing you have to have? So there's this term that's getting thrown around, which is half court pressure valve, which is great when the ball isn't moving or the defense blows something up, or you just otherwise can't find that production. But will Jeremy really be the answer in that situation? Because it's not only is it a pressure filled situation, get the ball with 5 seconds left on the clock, or catch the ball after a scramble drill and have to find a shot, or catch the ball out of a double team and you're in an off balance situation where you need to find a good look. If that's his role and that's really what he's being asked to do, or where he envisions himself being successful, we'll have to see what his catch and shoot 3-point attempts look like, how many drives to the hoop per game he's looking at, and if his free throw rate improves. He's not a big free throw drawer. And he shot quite a few threes, catch and shoot threes, a season ago. He shot about 6 of them. He shot about 6 catch and shoot threes out of 6.3 threes per game. So he would isolate 0.3 times per game and create a shot off the dribble. So everything he's shooting from deep is created for him, or it's coming on the back of offense, or on the back of a kick out. He drove 7.3 times per game a season ago, and his free throw attempt per drive was not very high. It was about 0.16. So in all of his drives, he would typically get about 1 free throw attempt per his 7 drives. Approximately. They're kind of rough numbers. So if he's going to fit well in this offense, you would expect to see some of those numbers perhaps improve. Not that you need more volume necessarily, but that there's more efficiency there. And that, if the offense is truly changing, those numbers probably should go up a touch. I wouldn't expect them to be gigantic. And I guess there could be situations too where the offense is so agnostic to who's the leader in it that they could go down too, and that wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing. So one quote from Jeremy Grant talking about the offense is, he says, "It does fit what I do, a lot of driving kicks and swings and motion offense." So he's comfortable in that situation, and that probably makes sense having played with the Nuggets. And I can't say for certain that his time in Detroit was really like that. I think he did do a lot more isolation attacking then, but they might have intended for it to be more of a motion offense. So I think if you're going to see this looking successful, and you're going to see it in a comfortable situation for not only Jeremy Grant at who he is as a player, but for the offense as a whole, what you'll see is a lot of like pocket catches for a catch and shoot, or one dribble straight line attacks, or catching the ball at the elbow and getting a shot up immediately, or a quick attack, or just a rotation within the offense where he's going toward the basket for something more high value and better efficiency. I think that would be the best way to unlock Jeremy Grant versus maybe what we've seen in the past, which is a catch on the deep elbow or a catch on the wing, and we just kind of watch him go to work. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but the overall efficiency isn't always there on plays like that. So thing number 6 we're going to be looking for is the rim protection and the big rotation that comes with that rim protection. So if that's Young or Rob, or if that's just a small ball lineup, the Blazers need rim deterrence, and they need to do that without fouling. If they're able to do that, defense is going to be really, really solid. And if you can do that, it gives you the opportunity to build an identity around it, and also gives you an opportunity to catch people off guard when you do go small, because you have the mobility to do that with athleticism at center. Like, Robert Williams is still very athletic, and Jeremy Grant is still tall and long, and he can still fit into multiple positions. And Tumani and Denny are obviously switchable wings that can guard up and have been solid on defense in those spots. So if you're trying to see if the Blazers are holding up their end of the bargain with rim protection, all you need to really look at is the opposing field goal percentage at the rim. And there's a few different ways to look at if they're doing that without fouling. But to start, I think fans could probably check in with the opposing field goal percentage less than 5 feet away. And a season ago, the Blazers were actually very good. That combination of Donovan being a second team all rookie and DeAndre, even when he was in there a bit, and some Robert Williams too. I know he was more sparingly, but the Blazers only gave up 62.9% field goal percentage, less than 5 feet, which that number might sound large, but it was seventh best in the league. So if they maintain that, or they find a way to even improve upon that, that's going to lead to a really good defensive team. So seeing how that plays out with, especially with the center rotation, Joe Cronin did say the development plan around Young is he's just open-minded to how it unfolds. So that could be G League, that could be role player minutes. It's just the consistent reps and making sure that Young has opportunities to touch the ball and be himself and do good things. So I think one thing you should probably look for with those centers is who's the low man you can trust. If it's Donovan, if it's Robert, if it's Young, I think you should be looking for some clean tags from the center per quarter, and making a scramble into a solid situation. And centers rarely look good in those situations. Famously, Nikola Jokic looks horrible in the situations, but that leads to such good defense. His defense is actually a key part of what the Denver Nuggets do, but because it looks funny, people don't think he's a good defender. So if you had a scrambling defense with Donovan or Young or even Robert, where they're just chasing someone off the 3-point line, or you're harassing a ball handler off of you're attacking off of a pick and roll, attacking the offense off of a pick and roll. I think there's lots of really good things that you can see there. I can't guarantee any of those things will happen, but just seeing how the Blazers centers play off of those actions will be really interesting in 2025, 26. Thing number 7 to watch is the wings that travel, which is, we've touched on a little bit, but it's Denny Avdia's and Toumani Camara's versatility. So we know that they can switch onto a variety of perimeter players, and that has, and it should continue to lower the opponent's offensive efficiency. And those two are pretty good at connecting possessions together in offense. And so trying to find how Avdia and Camara are performing, if they're not the top offensive choices or the key points on offense, would be watching what they're doing in those offensive possessions, but then also what they're doing on defense. So it's a lot of eye test, but you could take a good look at opponent effective field goal percentage, especially when they're primary or secondary defenders. And you could take a good look at on and off assist rate allowed. There won't be one single metric that says like Denny and Toumani are doing great on the wing. There'll be lots of eye tests and lots of metrics that will illuminate good performances, but it'll be a little bit more in-depth research if you actually want to see how their versatility is being used. In general, they're both very good players, and Portland fans know that. The Trailblazers know that. Everyone feels incredible that they're both traded for and have been very productive. We've seen what Denny Avdia can do when his role expands in an offense. When other players are out, he can score more. His rebounding skyrockets. Obviously, we're all familiar with the runaway freight train he is in the open court on fast breaks. So we know what we can expect out of those two a little bit. Toumani has vowed that there's much more to his offensive game, so that could be a fun thing to watch. Um, you know, I think all NBA players are incredibly gifted, and the league is really about opportunity and taking advantage of those small opportunities. So if Tumani can do that in a more motion centric offense, awesome. But we'll have to wait and see, you know. Um, so something that Tumani had said at Media Day was, I can't really be stuck on just being a defensive player. I always knew how to play offense. I'm just very excited about what I'm going to be able to show this year. Um, and something that Advia, something that Denny had said was, be a leader, help everybody be in the best positions possible, which is like very much a team centric thing that you want to hear. And I think one way you can really see the value of these two guys is how they're playing defense chest to chest, how they're either shutting down a drive entirely, just chesting up a defender, or completely dissuading someone from even taking a drive. And then on the other side, just how they're throwing the ball ahead to look ahead for a corner three, or how they're just moving the ball effortlessly to find and generate higher quality offense. Both guys are pretty selfless in that endeavor, and you should see that multiple times a game. Like, you really should. Number 8 is the bench stability and turnover control. So second units had some really good moments last year, and continuing that with more structure and ball security could really lead into the Blazers being even better in 2025 and 2026. So if you were trying to see if that's coming to fruition, you could take a good look at the bench net rating, and you could try to do a scan of like live ball turnovers per 100 possessions to see if it's uh, a unit that's efficient with its possession. It's kind of a unique look, and again, it's not a neither of those are stats you're going to see pop up on everyday broadcast, but that would be a solid way for you to take a look at what's the bench doing, and is the bench better than the opposing bench. And so something that Joe Cronin had said on Media Day was, these are the guardrails, and some of our guys, we're not just going to hand them the ball in 36. There will be guardrails in some of our guys. We're not just going to hand them the ball in 36 minutes and say, go nuts. So there'll be a more tempered expectation of what the bench and certain players do in certain lineups and units and rotations. So, I wouldn't expect, say, if a former starter started to come off the bench, that they're now a microwave scorer off the bench. There'd been some talk about Jeremy Grant coming off the bench and playing from that aspect, and I wouldn't expect his role and his production to look much different if he did. Now, I'm not saying that he'll do that, or even that's what's coming, but I'm just saying, if regardless of who's in the bench unit and who's in any of the rotations, there'll be some expectations of what they should do and what they're allowed to do. So again, the guardrails that Joe had mentioned. I think something you could really realistically look for from a second unit offense would be a paint touch every trip. I think that would be a highly productive bench unit. And then just simplifying the game to the point where get a shot or reset the offense and try again. Nothing stalled out. No one pounding the rock until they can settle into a shot, and not throwing sloppy passes that lead into, like kind of like a quote unquote pick six turnover. Just careless turnovers that lead to points, guaranteed points on the other end. If the second unit offense can do things like that, touch the paint, get quality shots, or just be disciplined enough to reset the offense and try again, I think you'll see really good overall production from the second unit. So number 9 is something we've talked a little bit about already, but it's rebounding by committee, and doing that without totally neutering your fast break. This is important because there's a really fine balancing, a tightrope act between finishing a good defensive possession and also not totally stalling out your offense or your free points before you even have to set up an offense. And the Blazers should be a pretty athletic team. They should be pretty quick. They should have opportunities for runouts, and we've seen again like how good some players like Denny are in the open court, where you don't want to just completely take away from what he's doing. But if Denny needs to be that player that all of a sudden his rebounds jump up to 8 per game or 10, flirt with 10 per game in some stretches, that's a realistic conversation that's going to be happening probably on a game-to-game basis. So something you could probably check on would be like the crash rate for the Blazers versus how many people are leaking out in that balance. You could take a hard look at opponent transition points per possession, which should give you an idea of whether the Blazers are more prioritizing their own rebounding efforts or leaking out, and how that's affecting both sides of the ball. So this is something that Billups has said on the team's identity at Media Day, which is the defense is built on physicality, it's built on pressure, it's built on rim protection. He also said finishing on the glass is how that identity cashes out. So your identity is not fully there until you get that rebound, until you pull it down with two hands and you start your possession, your offensive possession. So I think it'll be really interesting to watch possession to possession on defense, if it's box out time or if it's bust out time. The math behind we gotta get the ball or the math behind we gotta score. So you'll be looking for things like, are there true crashers and 3 sprinters? Is there an above the break shooter already and we have to be sprinting? Is there which of the guards is pinching in? Is there someone that needs an additional body to check? Theoretically, the Blazers have the bodies they need to get rebounds. There'll be some matchups that are unique and interesting, and there's some freaks in the NBA that require a whole new game plan to figure out how to stop. But every possession of every game, you're going to see the Blazers' philosophy unfold right in front of you, and all you have to do really is watch the point guard and the shooting guard and see what they're doing. Are they sprinting? Are they grabbing the ball and going, or is everybody in the paint crashing? And thing number 10 is the big picture. Is this a play-in team? Having an ambition to be a play-in team or a playoff team is obviously great, but can you both be a play-in / playoff team and also a developmental squad? So the closing 5 truths about organizational intent will be, the closing 5 every single game will tell you the intent about the organizational approach here. If you're seeing lots of Scoot Henderson and Young and maybe Caleb Love gets out there. If you're seeing these young pups who haven't sniffed the playoffs yet and haven't, in a few of their cases, haven't even gone through a full season yet, you're for sure seeing a team that's not really trying to win games. They're trying to put players in situations. We saw this a few seasons ago when the Blazers were putting all clutch time possessions in Anthony Simons' hands. Even the games when CJ McCollum was cooking, we saw Simons handle the ball in all the late game situations because they wanted to see what he could do. They wanted to give him time and space to make his mistakes, to see if he was capable, and to understand what the offense looked like when it ran exclusively through him. For players for fans that were expecting wins, it was incredibly frustrating because you watch CJ have a remarkable game, and then you watch the final play of the game not go through his hands or even use him as any kind of meaningful part of the offense. So you knew that development was the priority in seasons like that. And you might see more of that this season too. You might see Donovan Clingan post touches late in the game where you're going like, oh, I didn't realize that we needed to see that. And, you can't have the data until you commit to it and you play around it. So a good way to see how this is going, and I think the eye test would be pretty obvious here what the Blazers are doing, but you could take a good hard look at pre and post All-Star break data, especially the defensive rating, and see if that's going up or going down or maintaining. And then I think you could also take a look at clutch time shot quality, just to see if the offense is actually running its best stuff or if it's experimenting. So another quote from Joe Cronin on this kind of mindset and what the Blazers are expecting to do this season is, he said, "Do we want to make the play-in? Yes. The playoffs? Yes. I won't be disappointed if either of those things don't happen as long as we're continually growing." So there's not this overarching pressure to be making the playoffs. Playoffs are bust. And I think that's also pretty interesting in a season when the Blazers are changing ownership eventually. And there could be new things on the horizon in Portland from an executive level standpoint. Not to suggest that anyone's job's at risk, but just that there'll be a new sheriff in town, and that might create pressure eventually to win games, to sell more tickets, to put a better product on the court. I think Portland fans have been incredibly patient in the last 3-ish years post Damian Lillard, and now back to Damian Lillard, having to see some pretty uncompetitive basketball, some crazy lineups, some really head-scratching decision-making. So that could all change in the next year. I think the Blazers have plenty of talent that if they found their money lineups and they found the key combinations and the offense clicked just right, the defense was humming, that you could see a good playoff push. It'll just be a matter of, do they want to do that? So a good way to eye test this, if you see certain rotations, you'll know what's going on. If in the final 8 minutes of the game you see Drew Holiday, you see Jeremy Grant, you see Denny, you see Tamani, and maybe Shaden, maybe yeah. If you see those 5, you probably know that the Blazers are trying their best to win that game. If you see Scoot and you see Young, you could maybe throw Robert in that other group too. You see any of the young pups that haven't really cut their teeth yet, you'll know that the opportunity in that game is one of growth. It's not for a win. And that'll be all season. You'll be able to see that game to game in a lot of ways. So we're going to move on to one final segment here before we wrap up. And it's just going to open the floor to you. One of the big things that Tyson and I had talked about when starting this podcast was we don't want it to just be this ivory tower of content where we just say things at you. We hope you like them. We hope you're willing to listen to them, and you just expect to hear from us as overlords. Like we are more just the guy on the bar stool sitting next to you and striking up conversation and just enjoying sports for what they are. It's a communal experience, and we've really loved that in our lives. We've loved that we've built friendships and relationships through sports. So one way we can do that, especially with a podcast, is just to ask questions of you guys and evoke answers and try to share some of those on the pod. So we're going to do 3 swing questions here, and feel free to comment them, to DM us these, to email us. We'll take at least one and feature it the next episode, if not multiple. We'll see how it goes. So here's your questions this week, or at least this episode, I should say. Do you believe that Portland can fix the defensive glass without bleeding its transition points? Okay. Number 2, who emerges as the second advantage creator when the ball sticks? We talked a little bit about how Jeremy Grant is seen as that pressure valve. Who's the second guy you'd expect to see a lot out of? Would it be Drew, Denny, What do you think? And what do you think, number 3, final question. You can answer any of them, you can answer all 3. What's the most productive lineup for Scoot when he's playing next to Drew Holiday? Should those two play together too would be the other angle there. So drop your answers and we'll feature one for sure in the next episode. And finally, we just want to make a note that we are going to make an effort to be a hangout, to be a community, to be a place where you can come and talk and watch the Blazers and enjoy the game. Obviously, sports are best enjoyed in person, but so much of the viewing experience these days is done from home, done on the internet. So we want to create a situation where we're going to watch the Blazers together. So there will be a live stream, and we invite you to come and join us and pull up a seat, talk Blazers, hang out. We'll have it set up. We'll send a notification so you guys can come and join the chat. And if you're not out with your friends, come hang out with us. So that's next up is that preseason watch along. Subscribe to us on YouTube and obviously the I5 Corridor newsletter. You'll see more of us in other social realms as well. And yeah, thanks for joining us on this ride. I can't guarantee every podcast will be an hour of me solo piloting, but that's what you got this time. So thanks so much. See you next time.